Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
What if you could double your energy naturally without caffeine or stimulants in just 3 short months? It's not only possible, you can transform every aspect of your health if you follow the 12-week blueprint we've created for you in the Awesome Health System. The Awesome Health System is a free course where you receive a daily video lesson spanning the most cutting-edge secrets for air, water, exercise, sunshine, optimizers, mindset, and education. It's something most companies would charge hundreds of dollars for, yet you get it for free when you go to bioptimizers.com. To access your course, register to download the PDF report called 3 Phases of Bioptimization, which gets you access to the report and daily access to the first lesson in the 12-week, 84-day Awesome Health course.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a renaissance that's happening in the world that may sound a little unusual, but it's certainly sweeping the nation. It's called the mushroom renaissance. And today joining us is Robert Johnson, who is the founder and CEO of premium mushroom product company called MicroBoost and supplements manufacturer Custom Capsules Consultants. He is a cannabis and hemp industry veteran, health product expert, psychedelic advocate, and seasoned entrepreneur with a 20-year track record of launching successful startup businesses in new and emerging markets. His bylines, cannabis, hemp, Delta-8, kratom, and mushrooms, all have of all kinds, have appeared in Rolling Stone, Cannabis Industry, Daily, MG Magazine, Natural Products Insider, Nutraceuticals World, Nutritional Outlook, and Green Entrepreneur. And he joins us from LA. Welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Wade. Great intro. I'm excited to speak with you.
Well, Robert, so 20 years, you're kind of in this emerging market field, and the psychedelic. So let's backtrack a little bit. If we frame psychedelics, which have been used by cultures probably since mankind has been on the planet, and in the emergence of more, shall we say, creeping tyrannical administrative state, which it doesn't matter what political party gets in, that's been the increase or the restriction of many of these components for the last 100 years. If you go back to alcohol originally, and the prohibition, and then, the war on drugs and these versions. But something has happened recently where that's shifting. So I'm curious, as someone who's been around this, why do you think the sands of expanding our access to what was previous, quote unquote, taboo psychedelic substances, what changed? How did that happen as someone who's inside the industry?
Yeah, great question. And I think, there's a longer and a shorter answer to that. I think most recently, the interest in psychedelics, I think, could be credited to, the world going through a mental health crisis collectively with the pandemic and COVID, all being locked inside and really starting to, reconsider and reevaluate, what's important to us. And alternative medicine became something that was extremely popular over the past few years with the pandemic. I think, there's a growing distrust in pharmaceutical companies, and cannabis was really kind of like the gateway drug for, I think, all of these things to be repealed and reevaluated about what our government's been telling us is good for us and not good for us. So that and a couple of pieces of media, I think, have been extremely influential. Michael Pollan wrote a book published in 2018 called How to Change Your Mind. And it's a great book. You know, he's a famous best-selling author. Wrote what was that one? He wrote one about food. I forget the title of it right now. Anyways, How to Change Your Mind. He approached psychedelics from the perspective of a baby boomer skeptic. You know, he's a New York intellectual and tried mushrooms maybe in college and was really skeptical of this growing narrative that he was hearing about it being, you know, so life-changing for mental health. And so he writes this book, you know, starting as a skeptic, ends up talking to a ton of people that have benefited from psychedelics. He actually tries basically every psychedelic on the planet and reports about it in his writing. And that, I think, was really seminal to people starting to change their minds, right? You know, when I was in cannabis, started back in 2008 in Los Angeles, and in 2014, Sanjay Gupta went on CNN talking about CBD, and and I got a bunch of phone calls at the time from like my grandma, my aunts, my uncles. They're like, "Hey, you're in cannabis. Have you heard about this CBD that has all the medical benefits of cannabis, but none of the psychoactive effects?" I was like, "Yeah, I've been telling you guys about that for years, right?" So it's really when you need a source of authority, I think, to really change the minds, especially of older generations. And so we have all this confluence of our world really needing a pick-me-up mentally and spiritually, and all of these pieces of media and attention being thrown at it. Not to mention multi-million, $100 million, billion-dollar companies whose agenda is to push the legalization of psychedelics. And so you really can't look anywhere without seeing it. You know, it's kind of like if you just bought a Prius, you see Priuses everywhere. Now I personally, you know, talk about and see mushrooms everywhere I look.
Well, I've been fascinated with the topic in the history. And so, you know, the use of psychedelics, variety, depending on where people are located in the world, in the historical and practices, indigenous practice, shamanic practices. And then I used to live in Vancouver, Canada for many years. And of course, Gabor Mate became a very controversial figure. He was a psychologist at the University of British Columbia. And they had the largest open drug trade in North America, in the town down Vancouver East Side, and a lot of addicts. And he brought to the attention the therapeutic benefits of using psychedelic compounds in order to help assist hardcore drug addicts get off, you know, substances like heroin and crack and things like that. And there was a firestorm at that time with him, and he faced a lot of challenges and a lot of flack. I also remember Mark Emery was extradited to the United States. He had sold cannabis seeds in Vancouver, and had shipped them around the world. And he was the last extradited person on a hemp charge on a cannabis charge. And at that point, that's when the tipping point happened after that, at great national interest. And of course, I had been to Mark Emery's place before. I had seen the work of Gabor Mate. And of course, Emery went to jail, and Gabor Mate faced essentially academic, you know, suicide almost by going down that road. But they stuck to their guns, and then you see this emergent. And to coin one other piece relative to this, we also have the internet now, and the internet provides a greater breadth of information accessible. So where it might not be socially acceptable to talk about something that is regulated by the government or not within the comfortable, easy language of your peers at work or your family, you can do this research on your own interest, and humans being curious people, I think. And then you can get exposed to information in groups. You can take a flight somewhere to a country where all these things were legal, and you start to go, well, how come it's legal here and not legal here? And you start to see the complete smorgasbords of regulations, practices, acceptable cultural values. And you start to realize that most everything that I believe and most of the taboo subjects are simply cultural conditioning as opposed to absolute scientific validation. And of course, politicians and the subsequent regulatory agencies, which they implement to document these things, are merely like slow moving machines of public sentiment. And very seldom do they catch up and reflect. But we're now at this tipping point where, as you said, we've lost faith in institutions, and we've lost, not just government institutions, medical institutions, trusted advice, academic institutions. There's a tremendous amount of unease as we move into this new digital world and this derivative system from the like on virtually every single system, whether it's currency, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's the military industrial complex, the propaganda education machine we touched on a little bit before. Very interesting times. And psychedelics do offer a window into some aspect of what it is to be a human, or how it is to change one's consciousness. Before we go down the different types and influences, I'd like to know, how did you find yourself in this field, and what allowed you to maybe step into that more controversial, if you're going on a timeline, 20, 30 years ago or whatever, you're going to that timeline and you're kind of in that space, to now being someone who has companies and an agency where you're actually actively putting the operational pieces in place to create accessibility. How did that happen for you?
Well, I think, just at a young age, having a dream and a belief that cannabis was really good for you, and that 16-year-old me was right about it, and it's probably the government that was wrong about it. And I tried to explain this to my parents as a teenager. It was not well received. But, over, 15 years that I was in the cannabis industry, we really saw what was seemingly impossible become possible. I grew up in Texas. I went to high school in Texas, and, same thing. We would they would have searches of cars, and if they found a marijuana seed in your car, they try and charge you with a felony of a minor, and treat 17-year-olds like adults in Texas. And so when I've just lived this change and seen people's minds change over the years, and go from being, the black sheep in the family to, the one that people are calling about these things, because now, a decade later, it just has more mainstream acceptance, it just really made me believe that mushrooms can be the next thing. And what the main difference and what makes mushrooms so nuanced and interesting, I think, as it moves from illegal to mainstream, one is that pharmaceutical companies are really interested in it. And I think a big difference between psychedelics and cannabis is synthetic THC is a product that's been on the market for a long time. It's called Marinol, but it just does not compare to the organic, cannabis flower. So making a patentable THC was already something the pharmaceutical companies had, and kind of went over like a lead balloon. It's not competition for the cannabis industry. But with synthetic molecules of psilocybin, or you can't patent psilocybin, but you can change the molecule just enough to make it patentable. And pharmaceutical companies are even ambitious in their goals, that they're trying to maybe even find what it is in mushrooms that it does improve our mental health and treat, treatment-resistant depression, anxiety, that sort of thing, and make a pill or a product that would give you these benefits without the psychoactive effects. So I think, the big money behind it is one reason why it's moving so much faster towards legalization than cannabis was. and also just the acceptability. People are looking for any alternative now. The world is a tough place, and we're all just trying to figure out our place in it. But you mentioned like what I really struggle with is this ancient medicine used in religious ceremonies to help you understand the meaning of life or how we're all connected on this planet is now trying to be monetized and put into this capitalist system. So I feel like it's not really cut and dry that we should go towards legalization, or we should just have medical guided therapy, or we should just stop it at putting people in jail, and criminalizing this stuff. I don't think it's super clear, or there's one right answer, which I think makes it so interesting to talk to people and really understand where everybody's coming from. And one sort of central theme of my writing in 2024, it's really hard to determine what somebody truly believes versus what is marketing and what is pushing an agenda that's for their own financial interest. And so Michael Pollan, who I mentioned before, there's a term that's coined around his name called the Pollan effect. And that term is used for people misrepresenting or having just extremely heightened expectations of what psilocybin or magic mushrooms can do for them. And like so many supplements, it's being marketed as this magic cure-all, which I think is not true and dangerous. I think it's a super powerful tool, maybe one of the most powerful tools naturally, placed here on the planet. But it's really about the integration and the work and using this tool in a conscientious way for making the change and changing the habits that that keep us unhappy.
That's some great insight, and you are right. There is a host of complications. It's one of the reasons why we discuss these things on the Awesome Health podcast, and there are a multitude of ideas of how to address them. So you have the criminal components in some places versus others. So that's number one, and properly classifying these drugs. I don't think that most naturally occurring substances should be scheduled to something that has been, like a heroin or cocaine or something like that, or the negative side effects. I think if comparison, they're not even close.
It's even worse than Schedule 2. I published one article a few months ago for Rolling Stone, and they questioned me on this because I was saying, cannabis and mushrooms are Schedule 1, where heroin, cocaine, crystal meth are Schedule 2.
Yeah.
And the editor at Rolling Stone was like, this can't be right. I was like, look it up. The government, as far as the way that they schedule drugs, says that heroin, cocaine, all these things are safer and have more medical value than cannabis and mushrooms.
Well, this is so yeah. This is a real pertinent point, and of course, there's a lot of. I'm diving into this a little bit for our listeners because depending on where you are is going to determine the accessibility that you have to these products right out of the gate. And we want to encourage people not to violate any laws that may be in place or would jeopardize that. What I would encourage you, though, is to find a jurisdiction where you could consume those products in an environment with experienced individuals so that you could maximize the benefit. And then that's exactly what, for, say, someone like Dr. Gabor Mate, who is a medical doctor, and psychologist, and then he was literally taking people to Mexico under supervised medical condition to do some of the more extreme components. He traveled to South America, and myself, I have done similar things in my own exploration of these products. Is well, I don't need to break any laws. I'll just go to the place where that's okay, and so very much of a libertarian, and recognizing that the administrative state people are employed and have a career about enforcing regulations that may or may not be reflective of the public population. And I think it's upon all of us as citizens to recognize this, and to, if this is interests of, someone's listening to this right now, they're obviously interested in this, or they're aware of this, or they have someone using it and they don't want to understand more. Well, we need to be able to advocate the proper and judicious representation in our political environment, as well as the administrative regulation industry. I'm in the health industry, and frankly, many of the health regulations in the country I'm coming from, Canada, make absolutely no sense. But they do support people moving away from health products and into pharmaceutical products in the country of Canada, for example. And that's the same with our distributors in Australia and various parts of the world. United States is a little bit more freewheeling. It's also a little bit harder on the criminal side than, say, Canada. So Canada, I can walk down the street in Vancouver and I can buy mushrooms legally. I can buy hemp legally. Now you can go, there's a couple of experimental drugs where people are buying cocaine and heroin. So based on that Schedule 1, Schedule 2, or the differentiation between drugs that have a high level of harmfulness to the population versus, substances like mushrooms, or cannabis, that don't have the same consequences socially. How would you classify or clarify for someone whose child or teenage students came to them and said, hey, or a university student, early university, said, hey, mom, dad, I'm taking mushrooms, I'm smoking cannabis, I took some kratom, like, how would you like to see those conversations go, so that we're bridging the gap between maybe awareness versus risk? Because I think a lot of people get freaked out and think that a mushroom trip is like doing crack cocaine. And I'd like to kind of alleviate those misperceptions.
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody is to blame, maybe, except Nixon and Nancy Reagan.
Right.
Just it's years and years of propaganda that we've all been exposed to, especially those older generations that lived through that. And I think it's quite obvious why Nixon criminalized psychedelics. It was the people who were taking them were anti-war and anti-government, and about free love and free thinking and questioning authority. And so, I mean, I think the Schedule 1, Schedule 2 is not the risk to our bodies as humans, but the risk to the government that is writing the schedule. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a one place to start. I think most parents of high school or college kids that the kid is coming to them and telling them about I'm doing mushrooms. I'm sure that is a cause for at least some concern, or some worry that they're not going to be taking it in the right way. So I don't hold that against any parent, but I guess it would be the responsibility. How conscientious is that student taking this, and what research have they done? And maybe the best advice that I could give from my own personal experience is, like, don't listen to me, mom and dad. Like, check out this book by one of your peers from your generation, or Sanjay Gupta, or somebody that you believe is the authority on this, rather than the punk when getting a liberal arts degree.
Yeah, it's a good point. So let's talk about your projects right now. Specifically, you're into mushrooms, and for people who don't know, mushrooms have been used since time immemorial. There's a variety of traditional therapeutic mushrooms, for example, lion's mane and reishi and cordyceps, and these type of mushrooms, which have been common elements of natural health products. And with advocates like Paul Stamets, for example, is very well known in the industry, and a variety of others who have advocated the use of mushrooms to alter cognitive states. and transform perception. That was the health. There's the health side mushrooms, which have you don't really have those big shifts in cognitive perception. But then there's another classification of mushrooms which you do, and they're verifiable. They can be very transformative, and they can be very insightful. Can you share the difference with our listeners between healing mushrooms, at least from a physiological level, versus the mushrooms that you're advocating and that have more psychoactive and potentially mind altering or how to change your mind kind of effects?
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
Well, I think the interest in, or the kind of the renaissance of interest in functional mushrooms, the lion's mane, the non-psychoactive ones, really has a lot to do with the interest in psychedelic mushrooms. And it's really funny. I saw a comedian talking about psychedelics the other day, and his joke was, I thought we were supposed to take this to question reality and question the nature of life, not take it in small doses so we could just be super productive at our job for the man,
Yeah, I had that same thing. It's when I was introduced to microdosing, someone's saying microdosing, and I'd be like, well, would you drink beer out of the cap? Would you just smell the whiskey bottle? Would you be like Bill Clinton and not inhale? Isn't the idea of taking a psychoactive compound or whatever that may be to get an effect? So I share your I share your comedian's perspective, there is some therapeutic benefits of microdosing as well. So can you determine the difference and why people might use those?
Yeah, I mean, it's the title of your show. People are looking to be Bioptimizers, right? They hear that the Silicon Valley billionaires are microdosing and able to work 80, 100-hour weeks and have creative thoughts and disrupt industries, and musicians, artists, actors talking about taking microdoses and having it just help with their regulating their mood and their cognitive function. And so some of the things that studies have shown microdosing does, or taking magic mushrooms does, are a couple things in your brain. One is called neurogenesis, and it's the formation of new brain cells, and neuroplasticity, which is forming new neural connections. And so that's
the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor is the thing which declines as we age generally, and mushrooms are a way to augment this particular substance.
So as a supplement manufacturer, I make products for all different types of companies, and the past few years, lion's mane, and specifically, has been an ingredient that people are asking more and more about. A lot of successful supplement types out there are about improving performance, cognitive function, focus, and also coffee alternatives now too. Mushroom coffee is a big thing. People want to have energy to go throughout their day without crashing, without taking too much caffeine. And so I think that's one reason why people are attracted to psychedelics more. Also, if you like Michael Pollan had a really intense experience that you don't remember as a super positive one, or one that was scary, then they're kind of resist having that experience again. But I think this idea of microdosing is just like being able to dip your toe in the pool and really test the temperature, and you're not committing to something that you might want to exit from an hour into it if it's too much from you. So my whole career has been about legitimizing plant medicine by really making it like medicine, and that it is measurable, predictable, and consistent. So back in like 2009, I started a trade association for edibles manufacturers in the cannabis industry. And at the time, when you would go into a dispensary here in California, they had like edibles, but completely arbitrary units of measurement. Right? You would wonder, okay, how strong is this brownie? And the label would say, well, it's 10 skull and crossbones, and you're like, that sounds like a lot, but I have no idea,
Right.
what that actually means. And so, same thing, people's experience, anybody's ever tried a pot edible probably has that anecdote. I took a little bit, I felt like, maybe it wasn't working. So I took, a couple bites more, and then a half hour later, I was just way too high,
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think it scares away a lot of people from what could be a really beneficial ingredient, a beneficial supplement or plant that could help their life if they had it in the right dosage for them. And so that's what I find, really interesting about where mushrooms are now too, is identifying, what are the actives in there, and measured in what amounts are going to give, a predictable effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the more that we move towards having it be legitimized like medicine by having just any sort of standardization, I'm not saying you need, government oversight to have this, but just having truth in packaging and making consistent products is going to make these things more widely accepted.
Yeah, for example, people can use like alcohol, percentage proof is a way for people to understand that, okay, how many drinks I may tolerate before I'm intoxicated, or, you kind of start figuring out your own capacity. And so what you're talking about is creating a standardization that has a measurable effect so that people can titrate their dosages appropriately to the experience that they want to have. I believe that the industry is probably better suited than governments. It should be the industry that's informing the government of, how to standardize these things. Is there any movement in that area to kind of classify? Because I've noticed too, like, for example, in the cannabis space, when I was a teenager growing up, you got some cannabis, you smoked a little bit, and you felt a little funny, and everything was a little bit more sensual. And then, I accidentally ingested a gummy from a friend of mine, gave me this gummy, and I thought it was just a gummy, and I ate it. And then he's like, I said, what was that? I said, oh, that's an interesting gummy. He's like, oh yeah, that'll hit you in a minute. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then, an hour later, I was at a social gathering, and I was like, I hadn't had any experience. I was floored at this thing, and I was like, oh man, I'm just trying to hang on at that thing. And I was like, oh dear God. I had no idea. And so the potency, for example, of cannabis products have increased exponentially on one side, and then there's more of the CBD side, which you have more of the healing side of it. So there's variations within it. Is that the same for mushrooms as well?
Yeah, and like you were saying, the industry should inform the government. That's exactly what we did back in 2009. Legalization was first on the ballot in California in 2010. It was a midterm election and ended up losing, but edibles were on the chopping block because the government, they weren't sure how to regulate it, and so they were just gonna ban it, as typical
Right.
Government move. And so we contacted this lab in Oakland called Steep Hill that was one of the first labs that was testing like the milligrams of THC or CBD in flower and in product. And we told them we want to start this association, and the first rule of our fight club is going to be you got to test every batch of edibles, and because it wasn't required, hardly anybody did it. So they're, as a business, they're like, this is great. What do you need? You can use our lab as the meeting place. They realized it was going to be a ton of business, and that they could, really be essential in creating this sort of education for the whole market. And so a couple of years ago, I was at a CBD conference in Denver, and it was a CBD and psychedelic science conference. And so I ended up going to a few panels and talking to some people there. And I got invited to this mushroom pop-up that was going on in Denver. And this was like a week after magic mushrooms were just decriminalized in Denver. And so I didn't know what a mushroom pop-up was. I was kind of expecting like some sort of bazaar or something with people selling chocolates and playing hacky sack or whatever, a stereotypical thing. But actually I get there, and it's just a ton of political activists, including the people that were, essential in getting that law passed. And, they're all sort of sitting around the room talking like it felt like revolutionaries. I still get like goosebumps just thinking back to that moment. And I met some people that had organized the event. They're called Hyphae Labs. Coincidentally, they're also out of Oakland, and they're the first lab that was testing for psilocybin and the different amounts of tryptamines that were in mushrooms. And so, just being naturally curious, I started talking to their scientists, and I said, if you eat a gram of mushrooms, what is the variance of experience that you could have, based on the samples that you've tested? And they said, well, the average mushroom has 0.6% psilocybin in it. Less than 1% of the mushroom that you eat is the actual active ingredient, but the variance can go all the way from 0.1 to over 2%. So that's a 20x variance of what you could possibly get eating something that, if you were just to weigh it based on its dried weight versus the active ingredients, that's a big difference.
Yeah, that's fair. So have they been able to resolve that variance by any sort of measure?
Well, I mean the point of it is that if you're going to create products or consciously give people this mushroom as medicine, then they suggest that you test it, because in actuality, even if you have a bin of mushrooms, all the same strain, one mushroom from the other can have variance. Sure. in their potency. And so they're just really educating the market about this. Now they test, I think, for 13 different tryptamines common in mushrooms. They can quantify 11 of those, whereas the other two can just say yes or no whether there's any appearance of them. And so this is, I think, they've been instrumental part in moving that forward. I know they work with a church in Oakland, Mushroom Church. Also the first of its kind. I did an article about the founder there, and I've known him for 10, 12 years from our cannabis backgrounds as well. And, like you were talking about Mark Emery, these emerging markets really require these pioneers. And, unfortunately for the pioneers, often they're the ones, who receive the arrows, whereas the settlers come and get the land. But those guys have been really pushing forward. And now I know that they're requiring on their products, just like cannabis 12, 14 years ago, if you're going to put a product on their shelf, now it has to have the milligrams of active ingredients in, right on the packaging. So it has to be transparent.
That's lovely. And from a standpoint of using from microdose to, heroic dose, which people have often heard of those two kind of bookends of the mushroom universe, where do you feel that the average consumer that is where are they right now as a general sense of your experience? Are people more into the microdosing, or are they more into, hey, I want to have a transformative or highly, some sort of significantly mind-altering experience, where would you say the market is and falling or falling?
Well, I mean, I being in this industry and in my own LA bubble, I don't know if I have the enough of a sample size to know exactly about the whole country or the whole world, but definitely in the media, I think that the microdosing is what is getting people's attention, and I think at least getting people to experiment with it, whereas once you get comfortable taking, 100 milligrams to 300 milligrams, you might experience or experiment further. So I would say, from a mainstream acceptance standpoint, I think it's the microdosing that it's bringing a lot of people in, and also, from a pharmaceutical angle, there's a lot of anecdotes about the people who take the heroic dose and don't need to ever take it again because they're, in Paul Stamets' case, he cured his stutter in heroic dose. The people, cure this, treatment-resistant depression. And that's really not the pharmaceutical industry's business model.
That's right.
Give somebody something one time and they don't ever have to take it again. So again, part of the interesting rollout of this, and I think just taking all the information with a grain of salt and really questioning, for me, like, what do they have to benefit by sharing this opinion?
Well, Tim Ferriss has funded and brought a tremendous amount of awareness. He's funded a lot of research and organized a lot of funding of research in this area, as well as through his influence, exposed that and talked about particularly the capacity to alleviate the symptoms of depression and depressing conditions in patients who have been ongoing suffering in pharmaceuticals, which are somewhat mitigating their problems, but not eliminating their problems. And we're seeing evidence that this may be a whole new pathway for people to regain or to experience, well-balanced cognitive health. In fact, I have friends, naturopathic doctors, who use microdosing of mushrooms in order to titrate down the antidepressants and things like that people are subjected to, and he has a tremendous amount of success, and it's really remarkable. He's very well qualified. He understands the nuances of both the pharmaceutical side as well as these opportunities. As someone who's been in the industry as long as you have, do you see that will be kind of like standard care medicine? And if so, when do you think that might happen for the treatment of cognitive health conditions?
Well, I mean, it's happening already. Biden just approved like $10 million for psychedelic assisted therapy for veterans with PTSD. Yeah. And so, Oregon and Colorado now have legalized assisted therapy with psychedelics. It's being decriminalized in cities across the country. So, if it works like cannabis did, it will continue to be like a states' rights issue, and states making the decisions independently as the federal government kind of plots and strategizes on how they can own the entire industry, is my prediction. That's when cannabis will be federally legalized. That's when psychedelics will be federally legalized, is when it's a lot easier to govern a handful of pharmaceutical companies worth billions of dollars than tens of thousands of small businesses. But so the people ask me that crystal ball question all the time. I think in the next 5 to 10 years we could see that. Yeah,
I think we'll see a complete transformation of the landscape in 10 years.
Yeah,
AI is already changing stuff. The body of research is building a compelling picture, and I think that the changing perception of public because of those mediums, the general population will drive that as well. I think we all have to recognize that, particularly in a country like the United States, for every dollar that we're spending in what is called or referred to as healthcare, we're seeing a drop in the effectiveness of it. So that's indication that the more money that we spend in that industry, the more unhealthy people become. So obviously that's a broken model that needs to be repaired, and the expense of it is medical bankruptcy, for example, is really high. Now that's not outside of the mushrooms, but these are all what I call the creeping tyranny of the administrative state, and how regulations and policies and these things that often don't get updated now become, a lot of people are dependent on keeping things in the way things were, or the perception of the past, and not integrating at the speed that things are moving at now, thanks to these capacity to share information around the world. So, you can now share research from one part of the world instantaneously, and as soon as a new study is done, it's everybody knows about it. And so governments have to get up to speed on how they adapt their policies relative to that. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about MicroBoost, your company, and what you're doing as an entrepreneur to assist people in gaining access to high quality products in this medium. Can you talk about MicroBoost and what you're doing over there?
Yeah. So with this, great interest in mushrooms and people wondering, where can I access legal mushrooms? The answer is everywhere on Earth. You can get functional mushrooms, and they're incredible for your health. They've been used in Chinese medicine for thousands of years. There's a famous Iceman, Otzi the Iceman, this fossil that was preserved in ice that's 5,000 years old, that the guy had mushrooms in his little satchel that the anthropologists, predict he was using for medicine, as an antibiotic. And so the functional mushrooms that we use are good for your health in different ways, depending on the different type of mushroom. We talked about lion's mane, which is a cognitive enhancer. It also protects against neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. I've got a couple of grandparents that suffered from that. Almost everybody in the baby boomer generation, has seen one parent or their spouse's parent suffer with that. So I think, everybody wants to live as long as possible and, have their brain function like they're 35 years old forever. And so lion's mane, I think it also has a really cool name, has become really popular for that. It does the same sort of brain activities we were talking about earlier that psilocybin does, with the neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. And the other mushrooms that we work with.
Just as a sidebar for our listeners on lion's mane, both myself and my business partner use 3 grams of lion's mane daily. And our memory performance by using that is definitely extraordinary. So I was losing short-term memory, as was he has, and we're not that old, and both of us are very healthy. And we looked at lion's mane as an option, and I started taking 3 grams a day because I heard that had really the research had demonstrated really positive enhancements for memory function, and it made a profound difference, enough that it showed up on our brain scans. We do brain trainings, and we could see the differences in our brains. I put my parents on the same thing, and I immediately observed, I didn't have the brain scans, but I observed shifts in their cognitive performance as well. So in my own life, I'm very grateful for access to these type of functional medicines, because lion's mane, for example, has done a great job for me. And I have dozens of friends who I've suggested do the same thing, and they've all noticed improvement in cognition from lion's mane.
So if you're interested in mushrooms for bio-optimization, I recommend lion's mane. You don't have to worry about getting arrested or finding some secret supplier of it. Right on our website. And there's dozens of other brands out there as well that make really quality products. The four other mushrooms that we work with, they're besides the brain. I think the things that mushrooms help our health with, just in general terms, the most is they're anti-inflammatory, and inflammation is a huge source of sickness in the body. And then also they really regulate your gut microbiome. And I think that of anything in our body besides our mind that is really contributing to our mental health and our mood and our attitude, it's what's going on in our gut. And so these mushrooms have been used for that for years. So when I was looking up, how to make the best lion's mane product, the best functional mushroom product, I learned something that I think maybe is a little in the weeds, but is really important, I think, for your listeners to know that are interested in it, right? So when mushrooms are grown commercially, these functional medicinal mushrooms, they're grown indoors on a starchy substrate, right? Usually oats or corn, some sort of material, and that substrate is inoculated with the liquid culture, the spores of the mushroom, and from there, the substrate grows what is called mycelium. Mycelium is the root structure of the mushrooms, and then from there, the stem and the cap, the mushroom that we're used to, that's called the fruiting body, right? And so there's different ways that mushroom companies are making their products. What we do is we take that fruiting body, we remove it from the substrate, and we actually make a concentrated version of it, so we can put a therapeutic amount of mushrooms into a small form factor, like a vegan soft gel capsule or a gummy or a cup of coffee. But what I was surprised to learn was that a ton of these mushroom companies actually take the fruiting body, they sell that, or put it in a more higher end product, and then they take that myceliated oats and they pulverize that, and that is what they make their mushroom supplements out of. And Paul Stamets is probably the number one proponent talking about the benefits of mycelium, and no doubt there are beneficial properties in mycelium. But when you think about the sheer volume of the substrate that's going in there, there's a proposition to the FDA right now from a company called Namex. And they're, along with a few other companies, they're trying to say that the FDA shouldn't allow people that are selling myceliated oats to label their product as mushrooms. And I thought, maybe this myceliated oat product, maybe what is it, a 5-to-1, a 10-to-1 difference in the benefits of a fruiting body product. But their research shows it's more like 500-to-1. And so in all these emerging industries, education is one of the most time-consuming parts of changing minds. And so to explain to people buying something on Amazon, you got a big bottle of capsules for $19.99, and our bottle of 30 soft gels for $24.99. It takes some education to explain to people, like, actually, there's more mushrooms in one of our capsules.
That's right.
Than the entire bottle of.
Thank you for bringing that up, because for people who don't know, they're not aware of that, and I'm familiar with that Namex motivation or that directive, because I'm so glad that you brought this up, because as a premium supplement brand ourselves, we're very clear about the difference between what a lab assay might say, what an ingredients label say, and then what is an effective component of that. And the consumer that isn't really well informed oftentimes becomes disappointed, because the obfuscation of those variables means that I tried lion's mane, but it didn't work. Well, did you really try lion's mane, is my question, or did you have an effective dose of lion's mane based on what you did consume? And so many of the products out there are that problem. So thank you for bringing that up with your observation.
Yeah. And so, it wasn't until we found this like concentrated version that I was really ready to make a mushroom product. I didn't want to make something that was just going to be label claim or a placebo at best. And as a supplement manufacturer, I got that a lot, and people would call and ask me to help them formulate products, and they'd want all the trendy ingredients. Let's get ashwagandha and elderberry and lion's mane and all that stuff in there. And I was like, that's cool, but your serving size to have a therapeutic amount of all those things is going to be like 15 pills, right? And they're explaining, well, no, we just put as much as you can fit in there. We just want to be able to put on the bottle that we have all these fancy ingredients in there, and it doesn't make sense morally, but also from a business perspective. If you spend so much time, money, energy acquiring new customers, and then just hoping that they're going to, continue to buy your product because of a placebo effect or, lifestyle that is in your social media, I just find like that's a bad investment.
It's a poor business model, and reflects poorly on the industry at large. And I've always said that much of the criticism that's leveled at the supplement industry by other organizations in the pharmaceutical industry are correct. However, there are this small elite group of people in the industry who are doing the due diligence and providing high quality products. And so it's great that you're among those.
We saw the same thing happen. Saw the same thing happen with CBD too.
Yeah.
It was such a green rush to get into that. I think people made a ton of low quality products, and it was consequently the fastest like boom to bust industry I've ever been a part of.
Anything else about MicroBoost and what you're doing and how that?
I'm gonna be speaking at the South by Southwest conference in Austin in March 8th. So I'm really excited about that. Got a couple of great fellow panelists that we're going to be talking about notes from the mushroom underground. And it's ironic you started the conversation talking about the mushroom renaissance. I'm working on a book called The Great Mushroom Renaissance that
Awesome.
I'm excited to. I'm planning to publish this fall. So if you sign up for our newsletter on MicroBoost, I'm going to be sending like sample chapters of that book as it comes out. We have a paper that I wrote about how to read a mushroom label, exactly what we were talking about, identifying the difference between myceliated oats and actual fruiting bodies. And our website, our social media, Instagram at MicroBoost. We've got behind the scenes stuff of our factory here in LA. I like to just share interesting mushroom facts and stats that I come across in my research. And so we're just trying to build this community and just share our love and enthusiasm for mushrooms with as many people that want to join us.
Well, that was informative. Thank you for walking us through some of those sticky areas of the psychedelic industry, and wishing you the best of success. And of course, for all our listeners, all of the reference points for MicroBoost and Robert's websites, social media stuff will be in the show notes. I encourage you to go over there and check that out. And of course, if you're going to South by Southwest in this year, stop in and check out his talk. I'm sure it's going to be informative and exciting, and that you will enjoy it and probably take away some benefit. So for that, I'm Way T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers. This is the Awesome Health Podcast. If you like this show, share it with someone else. If you have some comments or feedback, we'd always love to receive it, good, bad, and ugly. And we appreciate all of your listening time. Thank you so much, and have yourself an awesome day.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. Turn cultured foods into superfoods. Raw fermented foods like sauerkraut and low sugar, live yogurt can be good for you, but rarely have enough of the right probiotic strains for therapeutic benefit. So here's a way that you can turn them into superfoods. What I do is I get some raw sauerkraut or a healthy yogurt. Ideally, it's grass-fed or coconut-based, and you can empty 3 caps of P3OM into a container and mix it up thoroughly. Leave it at room temperature for a couple of hours before putting it back into the fridge. And what's going to happen is these probiotic levels will be multiplied. In fact, it doubles every 20 minutes. And then what you're going to get is you're going to have a food with strong proteolytic activity. To learn more about P3OM and why its patented strains make it the strongest probiotic available, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.